Good day, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Welcome to this session, including a panel on the questions around sustainability and the environment relating to the pet coke market, both on the consumer side as well as, of course, on the supply side. My name is Schernikau, usual disclaimer. I'm a shareholder in a company called HMS Bergbau AG, originating in Germany. We've been active in the business for over 4 decades in Asia, India, Middle East, Africa, the US, and of course Europe. And we're quite passionate about the business, and I'll be happy to share a few interesting thoughts with you, which I would like to ask you to not just believe upfront, but to double check everything that you think doesn't make sense before you go on and share it too much. I will introduce a session about environment and sustainability by talking about more climate change and in fact the energy transition, which impacts all of us, especially of course the world of cement and power. I'm starting first to talk about a few words about COVID-19. Many slides you have seen already. This one is just an interesting one from Oxford Economics, which I always like. On the left side, it shows you where we are today, end of July, in terms of mobility trends, which comes from Google. Work only this is, and you can see that the G20, the top 20 countries, are still at 70%, 30% down in terms of mobility to work. That means majority, or not a majority, but it means 30% of people still are not back to work. There's a huge shift in our economy. On the right side, you can see that school closures have come off from the April highs, but still about 1 billion students worldwide cannot go to school, and that, having children myself, has an impact as well on the education in every aspect. Next, I want to talk about the impact of this COVID-19 on the world of energy. And as per the IEA, from a little bit older May numbers, about 20% of investments have been reduced because of COVID in energy. And that reduction has been primarily on the oil and gas industry, which is very hard hit. Coal industry, not that much. Power sector, not that much, but also quite a bit. And of course, efficiency investments. Interesting to get that perspective before we talk about energy transition and sustainability, as well as the environment. Now, Petcoke for the cement industry straight competes with coal. So I think it's good to also understand the coal market. It's an 8 billion ton market, of which about 1.4 billion tons are traded worldwide, of which about 1 billion tons is steam coal. And I would say the cement industry is tough to say, maybe 100 million tons. You might know better how much that makes up. But that is where Petcoke is playing, and that's why it's important for you to watch that. Now, this market is down probably around 10%, 8 to 10% this year because of COVID-19. A substantial reduction, but not as bad as other industries are affected. Now, this is an interesting slide from SEM Bureau. Frank Brunville prepares this, comparing just the coal prices on the top versus the two different sulfur petcoke prices and their discounts. And you can see that recently the discounts have narrowed more in line with the past, but of course you can see that there was a huge widening of discounts not too long ago, just end of last year, beginning of this year, which was probably caused by India, by their environmental policy. That gives you a sense how the environmental policy of different countries will influence this market very, very quickly and very rapidly. Okay, back to climate change. I could speak on the left the causes of global warming and how catastrophic they are, or I can speak on the right about how to protect our environment and the climate if we can. Sorry about missing a couple of inches up there. So I could be speaking the world is warming. Of course, the world is warming. Humans contribute to warming. There's no question about it. I think that's beyond doubt. But I could be talking about how much warming actually did we have and how much warming will we have. I could also be speaking about how much does human CO2 emissions contribute to this warming. Or I could be talking about how catastrophic is this warming. The catastrophes we hear about are twofold. One, the ice melting, leading potentially to sea level rises. The second, extreme weather events. So today I will not be talking about that. People who know me know also that I could be speaking about this and I would love to, but we don't have enough time. I will focus on the right side, how to protect the environment. If we were to accept that CO2 needs to be reduced and that this will actually save us from whatever catastrophes we're told about, then the questions I will talk about today is, will the transition to solar help us? Will the transition to wind help us? And will electric vehicles help? So what will actually truly help our environment? We don't know. So I want to take you on a small excursion away from what you usually hear, just to spark that discussion. Now, I like to start with the world of the past 150 years, and you can see how the energy use has literally gone up like crazy up to today. And that was fueled, of course, by the fossil fuel revolution, fueling the industrial revolution. Initially from coal, then oil, then gas, and some nuclear. Now, today, of total primary energy, wind and solar makes up 2%. 2% of that world of growth. Now, we have to understand that without energy, we wouldn't have the economic development we've had in the past 150 years. We wouldn't have the scientific development, nor the economic development, nor the wealth development of safety, of the eradication of health issue, of health, as well as, of course, hunger and poverty has been dramatically reduced, primarily fueled by this availability of energy. And with it came the cement industry, which is, an amazing invention, allowing us to build and construct in a short period of time very sturdy buildings and constructions. Now, I take you to my own country, Germany, and you can see that in terms of power, Germany is in 2018 already at 35% renewables. Today it's probably a little bit higher. Now, of that, about 25% was wind and solar. So Germany seems to have made this transition already to a large extent. Now, how did they do it, and what effect did it have? Now, the effect it had was that actually Germany today has 4 times higher consumer electricity prices than China, and still 2.5 times higher than the US. Now, there's many factors there, including taxes and all those things, but basically it's about the cost of this energy transition to renewables. Now, how can this be if we read in the press that wind and solar are now cheaper or about as cheap as coal and gas? How can it be that Germany then has these high prices? Well, because it's actually not true that wind and solar are cheaper. So let me give you an example why not. Now, on the 4th of July, our friends in the US, of course, celebrated. There was an interesting new record. There was a record of 97% of renewables in the German power system. And that happened exactly here at about 3 p.m. in the afternoon. 97% renewables. Wow. So you can see here, this is wind, this is wind offshore, wind onshore, solar, and then down here is biomass and hydro. Now, 97%, wow. They actually, basically all power can be produced by solar and wind. Of course it cannot. And I show you why not. Because at that same time, what you don't hear is that there was actually 15 gigawatt or 22% of waste power, not energy I should be saying, of waste power that had to be exported, given away at negative costs. So basically Germany had to pay to take this energy for others to take this. The Swiss, where I currently live, happily did that and took that. Now, a few days later, on the 18th of July, you can see that at 9 p.m. there was an hour where there was 0 wind and solar. There was still, of course, hydro and biomass, which is about 16%, but there was 0 wind and solar. Now, what you also usually don't hear about, that there was a 4 gigawatt or 9% power shortage, not energy, power shortage during that time. Now, what is Germany currently doing? Turning off nuclear, turning off coal. So basically turning off this fuel here, this gray area, reducing it further. So what will happen in the future, of course, that this shortage will become bigger because there's simply no way that during that time Germany can provide the power it needs. Now, luckily enough in Europe, we actually have a lot of wind, and you can see this in red here. This is in watt per square meter. Especially along the coast and here in the south of France, there's a lot of wind. So because of that, Europe has fueled this investment in wind power. Now, if you go to Asia, especially India, Pakistan, Southeast Asia, what you see is there's no wind. So Asia actually doesn't even if it was good what Germany was doing, Asia doesn't even have the wind resources, and I'll talk about the solar in a second, to do this. It's an interesting slide people don't understand or don't know about. You can really download this at Global Wind Atlas online. And when you talk about the solar output, what's also interesting is that here is Europe. Spain is quite strong, of course, North Africa, Sahara, here very strong. South Africa, Southern Africa, Australia. But actually, India, Southeast Asia, East Asia is basically as bad as Europe. So the solar availability, and this is about in kilowatt hours per square meter of solar irradiation coming to the surface. There are issues how you can use that. Now, the next thing I would like to talk about is what I started with, right? Remember that we've heard that these renewable ways of producing power have become now so cheap. And this is a slide from Wood Mackenzie from 2019, actually for Vietnam, but it doesn't really matter. It's levelized cost of electricity. Well, that's the number you always see in the press. You always hear or see LCOE when you look at the bottom what numbers they show you. And you can see that coal, is in Vietnam about 6-7 cents. Gas is more costly in Vietnam because of the LNG imports, quite expensive. And then you can see that solar in Vietnam is actually getting cheaper than coal in the next 10 years. And you even see the same on wind. Now that is what we hear and see. But that's wrong. It's actually misleading. This is baseload power, this is intermittent power. So this graph is not useful for comparing because you're missing a significant cost component here. What cost component is that? That's what we call integration costs of variable renewable energy. And the Institute of Energy Economics in Japan, for the first time, beginning of the year, made it a bit clearer in an official way. The IEJ is basically the IEA of Asia. And they're talking about this total power generation sector cost, which as renewables increase, conventionals decrease, costs supposedly decrease, but this integration cost increases. Now the integration cost that they're including is the cost of backup. We need a backup. You either need a coal plant, a gas plant, or a battery as a backup for every solar panel or practically every solar panel or windmill that you have in the system. Now, second, what they include is a grid cost. You need to invest and build the grid to get the power from where it is produced to where it is consumed, because usually the wind and sun is not where you need it. Not always. Sometimes it is. And thirdly, they include the balancing cost. Because of this high variability, you need to invest in systems to manage these imbalances on a very short-term basis, which is a big, big issue. Now, what this does not yet include is the efficiency loss. So imagine the more wind and solar you put into the system, the less your backup capacity will be used. So your your coal and gas plants are going to be used less the more wind and solar you have in the system. You still need them, but you're not going to use them as much. And there's an efficiency loss because as coal and gas plants ramp up and down, they're not going to be as efficient. Like when you turn on a car, when it's initially cold, and when you turn it off, there's energy lost. What's also not included is the material cost of building this variable renewable capacity. So the materials it takes to build the solar panels and the wind capacity. What's also not included is the energy cost. So the energy it takes to build this solar and wind capacity, which is much, much higher than nuclear or gas or coal. What's also not included is the recycling cost, because after 15 years, 20 years, whatever years you may want to assume, you're gonna have to dispose of these old variable renewable capacities. The IEA had the same thought in February 2019, where as per LCOE, this is now India, you can see that the cost of solar is becoming so cheap in the next 20 years, and you can see actually the cost of coal is slightly going up. That's what you consistently hear in the press. Now, the IEA made an adjustment to that, called it value-adjusted levelized cost of electricity, and which then shows that beyond a certain point in the system, actually the cost of solar is increasing and the value and the cost of coal actually is decreasing. So you can see that the large institutions, energy institutional, economic institutions, have understood there's something not right about this LCOE. So I will like to caution you every time you see a cost comparison about renewables and conventional power, look at what it is, and I promise you 99% is going to be LCOE, which is wrong to be used for comparison. Now, on the materials, we spoke a little bit about it earlier. This is now electric vehicle, electric transportation, and you can see that conventional cars require, whatever this is, 30 kilograms per vehicle of all these elements, copper, lithium, nickel, all these things. While, of course, the battery cars, electric cars, need, a factor of 4 or 5 times that many materials. Now, on the right side, you can now see actually minerals used in the power generation technology. At the bottom, you have coal and gas in terms of what materials they need. At the top, you have solar, onshore wind, and offshore wind, and in kilograms per megawatt hour. So here, offshore wind, you'll need, 17 tons per megawatt hour capacity of these materials, versus in coal, you maybe need, 2 tons of these materials. So there's a huge impact of the material needs which are going to be mined in Africa, in China, in the US, in South America, to provide these materials for the renewable transition. Now, looking at the storage capacities, you're hearing that the storage or batteries are becoming more efficient. They actually are getting more efficient. There's no question about that. But how efficient are they today with this newest technology? Now, to take a Tesla again, and I love driving electric vehicles. I mean, it's amazing how the acceleration is just great. But what does it do to our environment? And to give you a sense, so a Tesla battery has 85 kilowatt hours capacity. Maybe 90% of that will be usable and weighs about half a ton, very, very roughly. Coal, to reach that same capacity, you will actually need, after efficiency adjustments from the power plant, you need 30 kilograms of coal. Now, it's a bit of a funny comparison, but coal is nothing but a storage, right? I mean, it's stored biomass, 300 million years. This battery is now new storage. It's actually empty. It still needs to be, of course, charged. So the fact is that the energy density factor of pure coal versus current battery technology is about 40. After efficiency is about 18 times. So it's a significant disparity between the two. Now, more interestingly is that in fact it takes 25 to 50 tons of raw materials that need to be mined, processed, and transported in order to produce this one single battery. And these products include lithium, copper, cobalt, nickel, graphite, rare earth, and of course aluminum and steel. We're active in some of these components, including lithium and cobalt, so we have quite a good sense that what this means to get these components. Now, at the same time, you need 30 kilograms of coal that need to be mined, processed, and transported. Now, suddenly, this is becoming a material input factor of 800 to 1,700 times. This is the difference about materials that you need to build this capacity. So that means you need to, you can charge your battery 1,700 times, 1,000 times, and then you have actually mined the same volume from Earth. What I don't know yet is actually how much energy it takes to get this piece of coal out versus to build this battery, which is also very, very large. I'm working on that. Now, you get a sense of some of the issues that we are dealing with. Now, next is, it's all about CO2, right? We need to reduce CO2 because CO2 causes this global warming, and you have a large shift in Germany at least, so to gas, and also in many other countries. So Germany has decided to turn off the coal and the nuclear, and they're now building secretly new gas, but not secretly, but building new gas plants because they do need the backup for all their renewable. They know that. So what does gas do? This is an interesting study from Total Gas from 2016 that I found. And at the summary page, you can see this. Sorry about this messy graph, but on the left side, you can see that basically this is grams of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour of electricity. That gas produces about half the CO2 of what coal produces. Now, this is supposedly the total life cycle greenhouse gas emissions. That is what it says on the first page. And that's what we hear in the press, right? When we switch to gas, we will do a favor to the environment, or at least to the climate, because we are emitting much less CO2 per megawatt hour, kilowatt hour, whatever. Now, I read this study, and what I found that in the supplementary material, not in the summary document, I found this sentence: U.S. shale gas may emit more greenhouse gas than Colombian coal systems with 95% confidence. What are they saying? They're basically saying that shale gas in the US is for the climate worse than Colombian imported coal. So the LNG move to Europe is worse for the climate that they use in Germany than importing Russian or Colombian coal into Europe. Why are we doing this? And why is this difference? Where does this come from? Well, during combustion of gas, we know there is a difference of about 50% between coal partial load and gas partial load, 420 grams of CO2 equivalent. That's about a difference of 400 grams of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour during combustion. Now, during transportation and processing, there's a significant methane leakage or loss. And that methane loss needs to be considered. So, for instance, an LNG tanker during its road, on average, loses about 2% or uses up 2% of its methane. During pipeline transportation, there's leakages, small leakages. And I've seen numbers from 4 to 11% of methane leakages in the system. And then on the right, on the left, of course, we have the production. Now the production, I have no idea. No one actually knows how many losses and how many flare gas, how many emissions leakages you have. Is it 5? Is it 15%? I don't know. But the fact is that if you trust the IPCC in their assessment of greenhouse gases and what they do to the climate, 1% methane leakage equals about 50 grams of CO2 equivalent, because methane over a 20-year horizon is 86 times worse than CO2 as far as I read from the IPCC. That means at 8% methane leakage in the entire chain from production to transportation to combustion, you are at break even with coal, not with CO2. So the switch from coal to gas does nothing to save the climate. I'm all for gas. I'm all for coal. I mean, gas is an amazing, raw material, and it has very, very many aspects that make a lot of sense. But what we're currently doing is to save the climate that actually we don't really achieve with this. So claims that gas emits half CO2 equivalents of coal are only considering combustion and are actually wrong, or at least misleading. Now, let's look at the investments that are currently happening, including where you guys are in the cement industry or in the refineries. And you can see that about $300 billion per year are invested in renewable power, while in fossil power, it's only about 100 billion tons. Remember, when we go back all the way in the beginning, that 2% of primary energy is solar and wind, and 80% or something is fossil fuel. There's a huge disparity in investments. And of course, oil and gas gets this large portion as well in terms of the on the upstream side, which coal here, of course, doesn't get. And that is, again, that you can see this shift to oil and gas to try to reduce the climate impact. And you can see this huge investment in renewable power to try to limit the climate impact. So there's a big disparity. So if you have a problem, fossil fuel, what do? Take money away from it or put money into it to solve the problem? Well, it appears that the world has chosen to take money away from it, which I think is a huge and big mistake. And you're putting it into something that has a very negative impact on the environment, in terms of materials and energy it takes to build renewable power or battery capacity, or what I talked about earlier. Now, the IEJ has, in their reference scenario, realized this, and for that reason, they believe that coal will be with us at least for another 30, 40 years before it declines be below today's numbers. So that is what I share. I share the view that the coal, and with it petcoke, has a significant portion and has a long future ahead because there's simply no alternative to move to wind and solar. Bill Gates, just about a year ago, said fossil fuel divestment has zero climate impact. Today, he says a few different things, but that was still a statement which I liked and I would like to show you. Okay, in summary, coal and petcoke for cement will continue to be a main source of power. Conventional power are the basis for life, including CO2 is a basis for life, because with CO2, without CO2, no plants. With more CO2, more plants, and global development. So let's just put the facts straight. Secondly, wind and solar account for 2% of primary energy. Their cost will always increase the more we use them because of this integration cost, which is not considered. So the cost of solar and wind will always increase beyond a certain point, after a certain point, the more you put into the system. That's something very important, especially for Asian friends or other countries who are trying to replace, fossil fuel or conventional power with renewable power. Wind and solar plus batteries at industrial level are detrimental to the environment because of the material it takes to build them and because of the energy it takes to build them. And this is something that you don't hear about, but it's quite obvious when you think about it. Fourth, energy density, energy material cost, backup cost, efficiency loss, network costs, recycling costs are not considered in those cost comparisons, levelized cost of electricity. Therefore, it's wrong to use them for comparison. I ask you, please, to not use that and not believe any of those graphs and the interpretations they make from them. And fifth, our environment needs protection. We agree that humans contribute to global warming. There's no question about that. The law of energy conservation is obvious, right? I mean, where does all our energy go to, right? My phone emits what? Heat. In the end, all the energy goes into here goes up into heat. Every car we drive, every air conditioner we run goes up to heat. And that heat that we send into the biosphere every year is actually 600 exajoule. That heat can be compensated by melting 1,700 cubic kilometers of ice every year. Doesn't matter if that energy comes from oil or coal or gas or nuclear. That is just the heat that we emit into our atmosphere every year. Nobody talks about that. All right. The cement industry and with them the refiners need to review their sustainability strategies. I think it's very important. Sustainability is important. Environment is important. We need to protect our children and our grandchildren. But let's think of what we're doing in terms of the current, sustainability targets or environmental policies we have. So, of course, that they will remain continuous source of power are subject to local laws on sulfur and other emissions, and that we will speak about in our panel. Thank you very much. You can contact Argus, of course, for a copy of this presentation, or contact me directly. You'll get my contact through Argus. Thank you, and let's move on to our panel discussion.